Ladies and gentlemen, please be upstanding to the Mayor of Clarence, Alderman Doug Chipman.
Good evening everyone, and thank you very much. I'd like to call on our Acting General Manager, Mr Ian Nelson, to open the proceedings with council prayer.
Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosperous deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the city of Clarence. Amen.
Thank you, Mr Nelson. I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian community, Aboriginal community, as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay our respects to elders past and present, and remind everyone as well that tonight's meeting is being recorded audio-visually and will be available on the council website later this week. Thank you. I declare the meeting open and note that there are no apologies. So item 2 on the agenda is the confirmation of minutes for the 20th of August as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Second, Alderman Hume. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. There's nothing to report at item 3. Item 4 is that Council notes the workshops on the 27th of August and the 3rd of September and the agenda brief on the 7th of September. Thanks, Alderman Pearce. Seconded, Alderman Chong. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate.
Declare an interest in 11.3.7.
11.3.7, thank you. Any other? Thank you. Item 6, tabling of petitions. There's none in the agenda. Are there any from the floor? Thank you. Item 7 is public question time. There are no matters on notice. Are there any questions from the public, members of the public without notice?
Thank you, Mr Chairman.
If you could please identify yourself and address, please.
Citizen Fig. Thank you very much. Citizen Fig will now proceed. Thank you. The question is through you, Mr Chairman. I was present at the previous council meeting, and I noted that none of the aldermen declared an interest. That would be correct from the minutes?
My recollection of the minutes is that, Mr Fig.
Right. We also had an application from a member of the public representing a Catholic organisation who was trying to have the fees reduced, if you remember. And because we had no conflict of interest, apparently, I would ask the question of why Mr Cusack, an alderman here who has been the advisor and also a senior member of the Catholic Church, didn't declare an interest.
Look, I'm sure Alderman Cusack is prepared to take that on notice.
I would also like to know why the Mayor didn't bring that to attention of the other alderman, or bring a point of order, as you were aware of that as well.
Under the Local Government Act, it is up to the individual alderman to declare an interest.
That's correct.
And that's where the responsibility lies. Thank you, Mr Fig.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll now sit.
Michael Geard, 53 Cambridge Road, Bellreeve. It is noted the unanimous decision by Alderman to decline the extension and consolidation of use and operation restrictions at Bellreeve Oval, overriding previous permits, is being appealed. Will Council be providing lawyers to uphold their decision?
Through the Mayor, the answer to that question is yes. We will be defending the appeal.
Are there any other questions from members of the public?
Sachi Yasuda, Malana Road, Lindisfarne. I just wondered if there was any update from the council as to the sound engineers' measurements and things from the council meeting quite a while ago, because I think people in the public gallery are still having trouble actually hearing what's being said.
Through you, Mayor. The council has recently purchased new audio equipment, audio visual equipment. That's due to be installed, we're hoping, in the next week. And as part of that upgrade, the advice we've received is to also remove some of the speakers from the front of the chamber, which will allow us to refocus more sound volume into the rear of the chamber, and we're hoping that will fix the problem.
Would that also alleviate the issues to do with watching the council meetings via YouTube?
Yes.
And will that also fix when we've got too many people in the public gallery for people who are sitting next door?
Yes, that's the aim.
Okay. I guess we all look forward to that.
Look, I'm sorry, I only take one question from each person at a time. If you've got other questions, I'm sure we'd be happy to answer them.
That's why I waited.
Sorry?
That's why I waited.
Sorry, I missed...
That's why I waited for everybody else to have another question before I came in for a second.
Okay, well, by leave of the council, we'll take a second question, Mr. Geard.
Michael Geard, 53 Cambridge Road, Belrive. In regards to the last council meeting, there was no conflict of interest noted in regards to the Blunston Arena decision in declining their application. Does that mean no aldermen support the Tasmanian Cricket Association?
Well, I'm not aware, I'm certainly not a member of the Tasmanian Cricket Association. I'm not aware of any aldermen who are. Thank you. Any other questions from members of the public? Thank you. Deputations from members of the public. General Manager?
There are two deputations tonight. The first deputation is from Ms Leanne Doherty in respect to the development application for 18 Heemskirk Street in Warrane.
Come forward, please. I do need to remind speakers that under the meeting regs we only have a 3-minute window of opportunity, and there will be a tone of 2.5 minutes to give you a chance to wrap up.
I should be finished by then. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
My name's Leanne Doherty, manager of the Warrane Mornington Neighbourhood Centre, who are holders of the lease of 18 Heemskirk Street, Warrane, known as the Heemskirk Community Garden. This garden concept began back in 2016 and has continued to grow with a steady stream of conversation, consultation and support. The initial consultation with its closest neighbours was most positively addressed, as the land had been used for burnouts, trail bikes and other undesirable activity. They were commenting it would be nice to see the land used for something positive and to be a nice area to look at and visit for them and their extended family and friends. We have always worked in close consultation with council officers from community development, planning and asset management, who have attended our meetings and provided vital information around relative guidelines to ensure the project met all regulations, along with keeping the Garden Committee and local community informed by means of our newsletter and social media. After discussions with the building designer regarding the location of the said toilet, he suggested that it go to the left of the existing shed, which would mean it was more open and discourage vandalism, and take into consideration the gate the neighbour had in their side fence, as well as well placed to access services such as water and sewerage. To place the toilet to the right side of the shed was discouraged by the designer, as it's then in a corner and encourage an element of vandalism due to it being in a corner and hidden away. So the most appropriate placing of the toilet is the location that's stated on the plan. The toilet is the most important structure within the space, as people need to be able to access the toilet if they're there for any length of time, especially for the younger people and our more senior members. The toilet will have the appearance of a small garden shed. It won't emit odours or be offensive in any manner, as it will be connected to water and storage. The Garden Group works with a variety of organisations within Clarence and has received grants from a number of government departments to continue its development, including state and federal monies, along with the support of the council itself. Sadly, if we had been contacted, we could have explained the reasonings for placing the toilet and how it fits in with the further development of this community space. The development of this space has been predominantly positive experience within the community, and the Centre believes the council should vote for the planner's recommendation to approve this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second speaker tonight is Ms Prue Allen in respect to item 11.7.3, the Cambridge Primary School Master Plan.
My name is Prue Allen and I'm the chairperson of the School Association at Cambridge Primary School. I've come along to speak tonight on the Cambridge Master Plan. I just wanted to acknowledge the efforts and hard work that have resulted in the point that we're at tonight. We are very pleased to see a reasonable outcome being proposed, which is really all we ever asked for all those years ago. All of this time, our interests have been that of the school and our community, and creating a plan that was sympathetic to the environment whilst allowing for the school's expansion. This process has allowed us to take into account the requests of the council and come up with the ideas we believe will be a win-win for everyone. We believe we have worked well collaboratively in this process with our community, St Aidan's Cricket Club, the Department of Education and the Clarence City Council. With the benefit for the Clarence City Council of additional ratepayers in our area, we look forward to seeing the investment in our community. We are pleased to be assisting with money to relocate the change rooms for St Aidan's Cricket Club, and we also continue to be sympathetic to the Oval and to the Creek and enjoy the use of both of these areas. With the implementation of cycle paths, we all allocated some fundraising money towards a bike rack, which has been really well used, and it's great to see some positive progress. However, to date, we've noted that there has been no work done on the playground for the community, which means our play equipment, most of which has been funded by the School Association's fundraising, is being used by the general community, particularly on the weekends. Again, I thank you for the work done to date, and I look forward to a positive outcome from this meeting. I hope all the requirements have been met, and I look forward to noting how each alderman chooses to vote this evening and taking that back to our school community, who are keen to be kept informed.
Should allow a round of applause.
Thank you for those deputations. Moving on, there are two actually motions on notice. Firstly, Alderman Hume.
I'll wait a second before I speak. Thank you, Alderman Pearce. This motion is about planning, and as we know, planning is a very complicated area. It consists in Tasmania of the planning legislation, the applicable planning scheme, but then on top of that we get further interpretations of the scheme and the legislation when it comes to some of the... officially there are no precedents in tribunal decisions, but we do use tribunal decisions to guide how we make decisions, because the tribunal does try to be consistent and informs how they're going to make decisions in the future. So we've got the Tasmanian planning scheme coming into effect soon once our local revision schedule is approved. The state planning provisions that form the backbone of that scheme are almost 500 pages, and it's going to come to, I don't know, 1,000 pages or more once our LPS is approved. So it is a very complicated area. And you know, that complexity I can understand is very frustrating for a lot of residents when they're putting in representations. It's frustrating for applicants as well. But we see often that when residents do put in representations because they see a development in their area, often it's a list of grievances rather than something that directly addresses the provisions under the scheme, or at times there are attempts to address the provisions of the scheme, but you can see from the representation there is a lack of understanding about how the scheme operates. And that's not just a frustration for the residents making the representation, it's a frustration for us as a planning authority as well. Because under Section 48 of the Land Use Planning Approvals Act, we are required to make decisions in accordance with the planning scheme. So as an authority, we have to try and be objective, and we have to try and apply the scheme. And there's always a tension between that and our role as elected officials, representing the community. So what I'm trying to achieve with this motion is I'd like to see some materials produced. I'd like to see us encourage Legat to do that, because with the Tasmanian planning scheme it does need to be done on a statewide basis. But we can also look locally at how we can try and distribute that information and try and give our residents and ratepayers a better understanding of how planning law works, how the planning scheme operates, and to better equip them to write representations that will actually help them to defend their amenity, to make an argument based on planning reasons as to why they want a particular decision on an application. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here, and I think a lot of residents would welcome that. I mean, I don't want to offend anyone by suggesting that there's a lack of understanding out there about how planning law operates. I think people would agree with that. It's not offensive to say that, because it is a complicated area. It's like saying, you're not an expert in heart surgery or or the law, but it is something that I think we can help assist our residents and ratepayers with.
Thank you, Mayor. If I just may read point 1 of Alderman Yu's motion. Council requests the Local Government Association of Tasmania with the Tasmanian Government to develop, and this is an important part, educational material to assist residents and ratepayers in understanding Tasmanian planning scheme and the Tasmanian planning scheme. And Alderman Yu is quite right. It is very difficult. I know a lot of ratepayers think we've got a lot more power than we actually have. It was interesting at the Candidates Forum when Katrina Stevenson got up and explained to people there about the planning scheme and how we go into a different meeting where we must abide by what's in the planning scheme. A lot of people think you just go yes, no and whatever, but you cannot. You've got an obligation to follow that scheme. So I think this is a good start. I really do. I think it's a good start. And of course it can develop further and further so people will have a much better understanding. And it's a revolving door. It sort of keeps changing, and even we have trouble sometimes keeping up with ourselves. So I think this is a good start.
Thank you, speakers. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's interesting that the prior speakers did go into some detail about the complexity of the planning scheme and of course the nature of how we're going to introduce or educate the public in relation to the aspects of it. And it's also interesting to note that the request to the Local Government Association to work with the Tasmanian Government to develop this educational material, it may not get anywhere. The reason for saying that is that we have a planning scheme that is quite complex. It's in the process of being introduced statewide, and there is at this stage a lot of debate as to whether or not there is an equal balance between the public, residents and the developers. And it's out of balance. There's no doubt about that at this stage. It's out of balance. Now, how are you going to convene a forum when in fact the association and the government are to sit down and try to prepare an education material bulletin and then try to gather the public together and try to basically explain what you can and can't do. Now, it's difficult. I've been here a while, as you know, Mr Mayor, and even now I have great difficulty in coming to grips with the subjective versus objective nature of the acceptable solutions versus the performance criteria. And it depends on what, in my view, the officer's recommendation is in relation to planning matters. And many times we say in this place, they are the experts, they know what the processes are, and therefore we should pretty much take on board their recommendation as being what is the basic understanding and what is composed and contained within the planning scheme. Any means by which to educate the public is great. I think it's premature at this stage. I really do. I was advised the other day when I asked the question of the head planner at Clarence Council. I said, when will we get the new planning scheme or basically in place? And it will be probably 12 to 18 months. It's not going to happen. And even so, the TPC have to actually come back to Council, examine Council's recent submission, and then it's going to be advertised. I think it's got merit, Alderman Hull, but at this stage, I don't think we can do anything in relation to this until the planning scheme comes in. And as I said, that's going to be another 12 to 18 months away. That's my advice. And then we have to grapple with how, in fact, the system can enable the people to be able to come to grips. And I just don't think it would be beneficial. It would become more of a talk fest at this stage, whereas after 12 to 18 months, I think we may have a good idea of how the system works, and perhaps there may be enough amendments coming forward to actually make the balance, or have that balance between people's rights in the community to what sort of amenity they should live in versus what the developers are able to do as part of the ongoing sustainable development process. At this stage, Mr Mayor, I think it's premature. I will not support the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are two reasons I would think that I'm going to support this. The first, if you look at our quarterly reports, you will see that we, Clarence Council, provide a facility to people who are going to put in a development application to come and have the planners have a look at the thing first. Not to say it will comply or not, but to give an idea about whether it will comply with the scheme. The numbers of people who are asking for that kind of information has risen dramatically over the last couple of years, which says to me that there are a lot of people who don't understand how the current scheme we have works, and will therefore very likely not understand how the Tasmanian planning scheme, which is based on the same model that we have at the moment, is likely to work. So from that point of view, I think it would be really useful to be able to give some form of information to people in an easily digestible way. The other thing is, the GAT has a long history of providing information and training. As elected officials, we have the ability to go to trainings, the weekends usually, on the planning scheme, and further follow-up ones if we wish to, so that we can get a much better idea. Those are generally not available to the general public. And I think there would be ways, which doesn't have to be a forum, doesn't have to be written material, doesn't have to be at this stage really specific on the individual performance criteria and so on, but can look at the general systems and the general premises of the planning scheme that would be really useful for people to have access to.
Alderman Farmer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I do believe my memory takes me back 25 years to when Lupa was first established in the state under a federal legislator, and the state government did provide training to interested people in the community and community groups in being able to participate in it, particularly the community consultation section. So over those years, yes, it has changed dramatically in the sense that the community consultation points often put forward by residents have been moved in different directions by the way the changes have been put to the planning scheme. And I believe that this motion is desperately needed. 12 to 18 months is way too long for any community to wait for the support in an educational way in comprehending how assessments are made. It would not be difficult to formulate a planning training package which would look at the differences between residential zones and commercial zones. Council's ability to change ADA by putting in controls or conditions, but only where the legislation allows them to. And then also the differences between a subjective point of view and an objective one in the way the performance criteria then becomes the assessment means when we have a discretion. Those are very simple explanations that people can understand, particularly if they've given good examples of how they work and the position that the council is in. At this council I've put up numerous motions to date about the planning scheme and asking from the GAP to make those changes to make the planning scheme more accessible to people and accountable in the way that the community see their needs and how they get met. So participation is a key to consultation. I believe under LUPA there was a given right to participate under that legislation, and yet the justifications that people have about problems with privacy, overshadowing, density, character on the area have become more or harder to fight for. I believe our professional advice that we have been given at this council is often exceptional. There is often in the reading of reports a two-sided approach in giving advice to the alderman, particularly with contentious issues, as to how we can either accept or refuse different applications, and this is where the community need to comprehend that as well. It's not just a singular document, it is supposed to incorporate communities. And if we don't give them the ability to comprehend those changes, when that state scheme comes in, it will be even harder to make changes to it. Now is the time when we need to put forward the main changes that affect people the most. And I hope that that has been the intent of my effort over the last few months. I support this motion.
Mayor, I'm just going to be brief because so much has been said around the table, but I see that this motion as something that's indicative of a proactive approach to dealing with something that's really going to have a really overriding effect on the state. So I see this as a whole of state benefit, and if Clarence can initiate or drive the state government, because we are preempting that the state government is not going to put out an education program. So if Clarence can actually drive it and make sure it happens, there can be nothing but good come from that.
Lucy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to congratulate Alderman Henry. I believe it is possible to provide a better way to explain the Tasmania planning system to all stakeholders, then this should be explored. It's just common, just makes sense to explore this.
There's right a reply. Oh, sorry, Alderman Von Verde.
Mayor, I actually think that Alderman Hume's motion covers both now and into the future. So I can't see why there can't be an investigation, as it says, Council requests the Local Government Association of Tasmania to work with the Tasmanian Government to develop educational material to assist residents and ratepayers in understanding Tasmania's planning system and the Tasmanian planning scheme. The first part of the Tasmanian planning system, certainly that can be done right now. And I would imagine that what would happen is that that work would be being done in developing the educational material ready for when the Tasmanian planning scheme actually comes to fruition in relation to particular municipal areas, because it isn't actually going to happen on a particular date. It will happen in a municipal area as the requirements are ticked off as far as the particular local government area is concerned. So I think it is well worth looking at it being done now, ready to actually be implemented into each of the particular local government areas at the appropriate time. And I certainly think that the second part, the General Manager preparing a report for Council on options for making the educational material on Tasmania's planning system available and accessible to Clarence residents and ratepayers is something that can be done very soon. And I actually applaud all of you.
Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Hume.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Aldermen for their comments. I do wish to respond to Alderman James's contention that this is somehow premature. And Alderman Vomberto did make the point that, well, Tasmania's planning system, we have a planning system right now. In relation to the Tasmanian planning scheme, yes, it's going to be some time before it comes into effect. It's going to come into effect in a staged way across the state as the various local provision schedules for each council come into effect, and then the planning scheme will operate. But I think it's important to also recognise that the residential standards in the Tasmanian planning scheme are already in place in, I think, all but 2 interim planning schemes, something like that. So we've had quite a lot of experience with those residential planning standards. And the essential structure of the Tasmanian planning scheme is basically the same as the interim planning schemes. You have a variety of zones. Within each zone you have standards for use, standards for development, and within each standard you have acceptable solutions and performance criteria. So, you know, that structure is familiar. We've been working with it for a while. So there's no reason, as far as I can see, to not actually make a start on this, for Legat not to make a start on this, and for us not to make a start on it in terms of our local scheme. So I commend the motion.
Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Alderman McFarlane.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do we have a seconder, please?
Mr Mayor, I'll second the motion, but I'd like to make an amendment to it.
Noted. Thank you, Alderman McFarlane.
That Council seeks support from the Local Government Association of Tasmania to amend LUPA, to extend the community consultation timeframes for the larger development applications with projects over 10 million from the maximum 28 days to 60 days.
Alderman Vomberto.
My addition is, and undertake any consequential amendments that eventuate from such a change.
You happy with that addition?
I am.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. The larger developments often include a broad range of varied and complex issues: environmental, social impact, character of an area, visual amenity, noise, traffic, height, etc. And they're often very similar to the kinds of problems that we look at when we're looking at rezonings and large developments which are very close to urban environments. The community is often hard-pressed to achieve the required level of work to address the multi-complex questions and to seek answers along with their support from their experts. This is an intensive time and it's time-consuming work as when researching issues and raising money for professional support in short amounts of time. Broader information and research based on local knowledge often create better community outcomes and long-term sustainability for the development itself. We've often seen in the past where communities have been trying to address various issues, and for me they often have trouble getting the professional advice they need on issues like endangered species are not all that easy to find support with. And also that the time frame just is so limited when there's a large range of topics to address. This motion is based on a very common sense approach. The maximum of 28 days from a common sense perspective is just not long enough, and the 60 days is currently the time frame that's used for rezoning. I support.
Umberto?
I concur with Alderman McFarlane's reasoning for her motion. The reason that I've actually put that amendment is that I believe there will be ramifications in relation to other aspects of the Act, and therefore I think that we need to make sure that they are covered and considered by all and sundry. And for instance, with the extension of the public consultation period for such a long period of time, or such a long extension, that would then have an effect in relation to the requirement of council as far as exercising a discretion that it actually has a statutory period of 42 days. So that is the type of aspect that I'm looking at when I actually say that there needs to be a looking at what consequences it has for the rest of the Act. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman James. It is interesting that Alderman Bomberto made that comment in relation to the time frame that would entail in relation to the time under the Act that the Council has to deal with a particular development application within the time frame that's stipulated, and then it can exercise its discretion as to whether it approves or refuses the application. And that, I might add, is actually handballed to the appropriate officer to exercise that. He or she has that discretion to either refuse it, should it obviously meet that time frame of where a decision has to be made. The other point about this motion is that I won't say it in those words, but it's back to front. It's back to front because extending the community consultation means that it's going to be extended so the residents and ratepayers or all and sundry can actually put in submissions. What we need to do is to change our thinking and come back before the official DA is lodged, because that is the time that we need to be able to look at the process, at the project and determine as to whether or not it is going to be in accordance with what the public believe, and therefore there is enough consultation on that to be able to allow the public to know beforehand, before the consultation process or the statutory process starts. And by extending it 60 days, not only are you going to have problems with other sections of the Act because of, as I mentioned, having to handle that process, otherwise the officers will exercise their right of delegation. We need to be able to do something before all this. And there is examples of that. And I don't need to go into kangaroo bar. If there had been consultation prior to it, you know, we would have not got to the stage where we had a motion put up and then not long after we had another DA put forward. We need to get to the source, not post-communication or consultation in accordance with the statutory provisions. The other point about this particular motion is, why 10 million? Why 10 million? Now, I know we have our own processes here in which we have consultation when large projects come for consideration, but there are other projects. Now, I'm not saying that it ought to be 2 million or 5 million, but there are a lot of projects that actually fall within that category of under 10. And therefore, look, it makes sense to have an introduction to the consultation process before the actual statutory process underway, because I don't think it's going to achieve anything. You may be able to have a longer period of time where people can put in submissions, but by that time there is a recommendation probably in hand, and there's not a lot that can be done in order to change that. Whereas if we go back and have community consultation prior to the official statutory consultation, then we can overcome a lot of these problems. And council has developed this sort of instinct to wait till community consultation comes into place and then try to pick up ground or make a change. But it's too late. It's far too late. It has to happen prior to the statutory consultation. I like the idea of what you're proposing is to give people a greater say. But by extending the period doesn't, in my view, really get to the crux of the issue. And that is, we need to move before that stage and let the people have their say and know full well what the ramifications are. Otherwise, we're just going to have an extension of it.
Alderman Hume. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, one of the reasons why this motion is important, I'll just go to the last large development we had. There were 12 development standards that were addressed in the report, 28 conditions placed on the development, and the assessment report from the officers was 93 pages. So I think that those numbers sort of paint the picture in terms of the complexity of some of these developments. Now, going to a question that Alderman James raised, and he said, why 10 million? I think a good reason for that threshold is because that threshold already has some relevance in terms of triggering whether there should be a special meeting in relation to development. That value is the threshold for triggering a special meeting. So it makes sense to use a threshold that's already available as a trigger for something else to make it a trigger for this extended consultation period. I do have a bit of an issue with the suggestion that Alderman Jones puts forward about having this two-stage process as a mandated legislative process. And that issue is that when a final application comes before council, and it needs to be, set in stone, other than minor amendments that are conditioned to meet the planning scheme. It is actually for the developer to determine what comes forward. Now, a developer may choose to run their own community consultation to determine, what sort of development the community would like to see and amend their development accordingly. But the issue I have is if we make that a mandated process that all developers must follow with whatever size developments, name your threshold, it could be 10 million, 5 million, whatever, then I wouldn't be surprised if a number of developers might just go through that extra process in terms of ticking a box and then put forward the development that they originally proposed in the first place. it serves as no more than a formality, and I can't see that it's necessarily going to improve the process. Yeah, I do think that it was a good approach we took when it came to the resolution on the second development site for Kangaroo Bay, where we asked for required the developer to undertake a community consultation process, but we did that because it was on council land, and I think it's also positive that developers that have proposed developments for council land that have been invited to submit an application as part of an expression of interest process have undertaken consultation off their own steam. But ultimately, our planning scheme is about assessing the proposals that come forward for development and determining whether they're in accordance with the scheme. So I don't see that there's necessarily any merit in legislating that two-stage process that Alderman James is talking about. I do, however, think that with the complexity of the planning scheme and the additional complexity of larger applications, and we do see that larger applications tend to be a lot more complex, there is a lot of merit in what Alderman McFarlane is proposing, so I support the motion.
Thank you. I would remind Alderman that we do have item 11.7.2 coming up later in the agenda, review of the Local Government Act terms of reference, and one of the proposals there is we do ask the government to explore the interaction between consultation under the Local Government Act and LUPA. So I think that's an opportunity for us to pursue that point further. Any other speakers? Alderman Walker.
I'll be very brief. I do support the intent of this motion, if you like, the spirit of the motion. I'm probably disinclined at this stage, subject to other debate, to actually support the motion that's before me. And the main reason for that is I'm basically being asked to vote on a motion when we haven't had the opportunity to talk about what the consequences might be against LUPA. So if other people are inclined my way and this motion isn't successful tonight, I would be hoping that we could talk it through, and then, depending on what comes through that, the possibility of resubmitting. But at this stage, you're asking me to vote on something when I don't know the consequences of it, and I'm not going to do it.
Alderman Hugh Cusick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I support this motion. I think we had the situation not long ago where a DA on a large project was submitted not long before Christmas, which cut out 14 or 12 or 14 days of the 28 days. So I support that. And I also had some sympathy for Alderman James's comments. I think if we had the capacity for consultation prior to lodging a DA, it'd be great. I mean, as I understand, currently Council cannot initiate public community consultation prior to a DA or force a proposed developer to consult, or how that consultation might take place if the developer does decide to consult. If that could be achieved, I think that would be very much a positive.
Other speakers? Alderman Fairley?
I would just like to say, Mr Mayor, I was going to say what Alderman Cusack has said about the Christmas period, because it's not in Council's fault, so to speak, when an application is put in prior to Christmas and people are otherwise preoccupied. What I will say is that Council's in a position where it actually has to deal with a number of developers, and there is procedural fairness in all of this. And as we say, we've got statutory obligations, but if we can suggest to a developer to consult with the community, or we can think it's rather prudent to do so, but we can't force that to happen. And we have to actually look after the interests of developers and as well as the community. So when a developer actually has a proposal on, most times, if it's really
quite substantial, you will find that that's in their best interest as well, because it's very disruptive after the DA has gone in to find, once there is a public consultation, that everybody's up in arms and it's really not a popular thing at all. So there is a balance that's got to be achieved. The thing that worries me about going to consultation prior to a DA actually provides something concrete in front of you. You actually know exactly what is being presented. And prior to that, you could be going to the public with, plans that are not necessarily accurate, or they are not set in concrete yet. So from that point of view, I support this motion because I think it does provide the opportunity for a greater period and more opportunity for people to get their professional responses back, and I'll support this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, look, I support the motion. I think it's quite sensible to extend the time. I do agree with what Alderman Thurley said, that putting roads development applications in over Christmas, we have no say, but I think that's ridiculous. And I think somewhere along the line that needs to be changed. Here, to extend the period of time for applications for projects over 10,000 from 28 days to 60 days, I think that's very sensible, and I think that certainly needs our support.
Yes. Right, a reply, Alderman Farnham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just as an explanation to the gallery, from my perspective in the past when we've put forward motions to seek support from the GAP, there's been ongoing discussion about the motion prior to it even getting to the Minister. So my perspective is that this is the first stage of an approach to the Minister, which will include other councils, because within the Legat committee regime discussion goes on, and I would take it that if other councils had problems, they might like to take it back to their own councils for discussion. Also, the fact that with Alderman James's suggestions of having a previewing time before items get to be exhibited, I don't have a problem with that, but it does mean that Alderman James needs to formulate a motion to create that effect, and it would need a lot of research and input to get it to the stage where it was something we could slide in to the scheme. I do hope that this motion invigorates a bit of debate and hopefully a final recommendation to the Minister, which will be supported by all of the state councils. For me, I find that in looking at what and how the current planning scheme was put together, that it had a particular focus, and now that that focus has been written up, it is now a time of review. For me, I believe that the Commission in their review of the interim planning scheme would see some changes, but we've not had anything back in writing, so I don't know what they've actually accomplished. For me, this motion covers issues to do with procedural fairness, which in the past with the previous planning schemes were there when those planning schemes belonged to the councils. Another issue is procedural fairness with equity and social justice, which I think have been very watered down with the interim planning scheme. Those sorts of discussions and arguments take time, and they won't change overnight. And so the best way for us to move forward as a singular council is to seek support from our fellow councillors in looking at common sense changes that make it better in the long run. Some of those changes could be a change to the days or to the 42 days. I agree that those items need to be discussed as well, and I'm quite happy for them to be included at the gap.
Thank you. So the motion is as presented by Alderman McFarlane, amended by Alderman von Berto. All those in favour? Against? Motion's carried. Moving on to item 10, 10.1 reports from single and joint authorities. Southern Tasmanian Council's authority, reports not required. Copying refuse disposal site joint authority. I note there's a summary to the quarterly report. Alderman Campbell, do you wish to speak to that?
No.
Okay, I think the moving's not required until the second session. And then the Tasmanian Water Corporation, there's an item on this later on in the agenda which will cover the special meeting for the 27th. So item 10.2, reports from councils and special committees and other representative bodies. Are there any reports? Alderman Chong.
Can I table the minutes of the Richmond Advisory Committee and the Community Health and Wellbeing Advisory Committee?
Being no other reports.
Mr Mayor, sorry, I didn't bring the Cycling South minutes, so I've had problems with my computer and then the printer won't talk to one another. I'll forward them to your email.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 11, 11.1, that the information in the weekly briefing reports of the 20th and 27th of August and the 3rd of September be noted. Thank you, Alderman Hurley. Second, Alderman Cusick. Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer to the weekly briefing report of the 27th of August 2017 and to the Kangaroo Bay Hotel billing. My question through you to Mr Graham in his capacity as the manager of that department. Mr Graham, in answer to my question, which you have answered in part 1 of the paragraph, in the second paragraph, and it's in relation to the amount of filling that can actually be filled abutting the old jetty where the Kangaroo Bay Hotel is going to, well, when the hotel is going to be built. You say in the last paragraph, there is no quantity of fill specified. So my question through you is to how far out can they go with their filling as far as into the bay? And secondly, how high can they go? Or what's the level at which they can actually taper off? Because according to your memorandum of the 30th of August, it says quite clearly there is no quantity of fill specified. Perhaps you could answer.
Through you, Mr Mayor, in terms of quantity, that's what sort of volume. The approved plan doesn't specify volume, but they do specify in terms of floor level. So the filling can come up to such that they need the floor construction so at the floor level, and then they have a thickness of slab and footing. I'll come up the underside of that. And in terms of the area extent, they won't go out beyond the approved plans in terms of what is shown on the plan.
As supplementary, yes, through you to Mr Graham. Mr Graham, on the plans, it doesn't or doesn't specify specifically how far out they can go with the filling. So my question, again, through the Mayor to you, is that since it says there's no quantity of fill specified, does that mean that they can go out beyond the envelope and extend as far as they basically can or want to actually make sure that the footprint of the new hotel can be extended as well as cater for the walkway around the foreshore?
Through Mr Mayor, no, I believe that they can go extend beyond what is shown actually on the plan in terms of the area of the
Thank you. Mr Graham, any other questions or discussion on the weekly briefing reports? In that case, I'll put the motion that it be noted. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. There are no determinations under 11.2. I'd like to advise that Council now intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And move on to the development items. The first application is 11.3.1, a development application at 191 Corella Street, Harrow, for a dwelling. Moved Alderman Campbell, seconded Alderman Hume. Wish to speak to it? Alderman Hume. Other speakers? The recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.2 is a development application at 18 Heemskirk Street, Warrane, for a community garden. I'm sorry. Did you see which one got? No, I'm sorry.
Alderman Van Buiten.
I'll defer this time. I think last time you won the race, but I'll offer it to Alderman Van Buiten on this occasion.
Mayor, I wish to put the officer's recommendation.
Seconded.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman James. Would you like to speak to it, Alderman Van
I
Buiten?
would, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, as the report actually says, this came to Council on the 7th of November 2016 in relation to the lease of the land. However, the Neighbourhood Centre has been working on this proposal for many years, and the Positive Ageing Committee became aware of this proposal when it was literally a gleam in the Neighbourhood Centre's eye. So I think it's very important to note that the centre has worked with Council and with the community all the way through in relation to this proposal. And of course it ticks all the boxes in relation to health and wellbeing. It's a project that people of all ages can be involved with. So from the perspective of us being an age-friendly city, it meets all of the requirements. And I actually believe that it's important to note this would not be coming before us except that the centre has done the right thing in relation to letting us know that there may be people within the garden in the summertime past 6 p.m, so through to 9 p.m. That is where our discretion lies in relation to the extension of the hours. I think it's really important to note, as Leanne Doherty said to us, that the centre's actually worked with our staff and with building experts in relation to where to place the building, and in particular the toilet. And I think that aspect about if it was moved, there's a suggestion that it be moved to the corner, the northwest corner. If that was the case, then there may be issues in relation to safety by design as far as vandalism is concerned. So I think they are really important issues to note. I believe that we should actually approve this and wish the centre well and support them in whatever way we possibly can. We've already done that, but I believe in the future we may be able to do more. Thank you.
Very well, in fact, because the success of the Risdon Vale Neighbourhood Centre with their garden, and also Anne Harrison working in conjunction with Leanne Doherty over the years, you know, look, it's been a great partnership, and it's always been for the community. And Leanne has really reached out and obviously tapped into people who actually live nearby and so on. And word gets around, of course it does, when something like this is being proposed. But when we discussed this late last year, I think it was some time ago, 2016, we did, I think, cover all bases. We did tick all the boxes, and we made sure that everything was going to go according to plan. Of course there have been representations, but I think at the end of the day there's going to be overwhelming support for this. I know it's going to provide an opportunity for the people who live not only in the immediate environs but also the neighbourhood proper. And I think this is long overdue, and I think tonight we'll give it a tick in the box and get on with the job. And I'm sure those representatives that have felt there is some need for change would abide by and agree to, I think, in the longer term, that this is a marvellous facility for the community and for the neighbourhood centre. I support the motion.
Alderman Hugh.
Mr Mayor, I agree with Alderman James. I think this is going to be a great community facility, and I congratulate the Ray Mornington Neighbourhood Centre on getting it to this stage. But we are sitting as a planning authority, and just looking at it from a planning perspective, Alderman Bomberto did mention that the discretion that caused this item to be on the agenda is in relation to hours of use. There have been some suggestions about putting in a condition to move the toilet, and the issue I have with that suggestion is, in terms of its location, it does actually meet the acceptable solution. So in terms of that location, it is a permitted use. And as a permitted use, if we weren't dealing with the hours of operation and the discretion we have in relation to that, we wouldn't even be debating it right now. They would have a permit right now because it would be a permitted use. So, in terms of addressing applications from the point of view of relevant planning matters, if there is a discretion in relation to something, that's really the only thing we can address, and the performance criteria in relation to that. So I support the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With another non-council hat on, I've done quite a bit of work with New Tasmanians, and one of the things they often have problems with is growing food that they're familiar with, because when you rent, it's actually quite difficult to plant vegetables and things. And a community garden is a great way to provide people with access to be able to grow their own vegetables or fruit, but also from a social point of view, to be able to interact and not live in boxes and not communicate with other people in the environment.
Heading towards a planning point, I take it, Alderman Johnson?
I was waiting for it.
I don't think to get there.
Good point, Mr Mayor.
As Alderman Hugh has mentioned, the discretion in this is actually reducing hours in summer. And I think from a health and wellbeing point of view, that ability in the long summer evenings to actually spend time outdoors gardening, really great idea. And I think we should support the discretion in this particular matter and support the recommendation.
I support the motion as well, and in relation to the opening hours during summer being extended to 9 o'clock, this can only have a beneficial effect on the community, because I note that minor vandalism has occurred at the site previously, and with the presence of people who are actually there for good intent, I am sure it will deter people that may be there for bad intent. So I can only see this as a good thing.
The speakers, Alderman Walker.
Support the application, support the discretion, and puzzle over what might be the costs and consequences if the toilet block was moved as an alternate motion suggested.
Okay. Other speakers. Alderman McFarlane.
I support everything Alderman Walker said. I support the application and the discretion. I feel that, if there is ever going to be problems with vandalism, we wait and see if that happens. If that happens and there's a need to move the toilet, then say la vie, we've got evidence to back any changes.
Final reply. Thank you. The motion is then that we approve the community garden application at 18 Heemskirt Street with subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.3 is a development application at 10 Eildon Street, Lindisfarne, for 4 model dwellings. Thanks, Alderman Campbell. Seconder. Alderman Hume, wish to speak? Alderman Hume, would you like to speak? Any other speakers on this motion? In that case, I'll put the motion which is recommending approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.4 is a development application at 26 Maxwell's Road, Cambridge for a truck turning facility. Thanks, Alderman Chong. Seconded Alderman Thurley. Speakers?
Nothing.
Alderman Thurley, would you like to speak to it?
Other than to say that this supports this particular business being able to carry on its activities because access has been denied from its original source. So this is a common sense decision that would be necessary to enable it to conduct its business free of any other hassles, and I'm sure the situation is going to be rectified in the future under different land ownership, neighbourhood ownership. Thank you.
The speakers. Right reply? Not needed? Okay, the recommendation is for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.5 is a development application at 14D Bayside Drive, Lauderdale, for a dwelling. Alderman Hume, seconded Alderman Thurley. Speakers? Alderman Thurley.
I just wanted to say that there's a representative that put a comment forward in relation to privacy, and it hasn't stood up as far as the performance criteria goes. But if you're going to invest in a subdivision where the blocks are already smaller, I think you've already expressed your intent that privacy is not necessarily your major concern, because naturally when you have smaller building blocks you're going to have less space, or less, not necessarily, but you're going to have the presence of your neighbours a bit closer than if you had a 1200 metre block, for instance. So I love the design of this house. This is a good concept. It's met the performance criteria, and I think going forward we may well see perhaps more development applications in this particular subdivision come forward before us, but that they seem to be rectified.
Well, since you wish to speak.
Yes, I do, and I am aware, and I know my colleagues are aware, that there has been a representation from the adjoining property owner. And may I recall that on the 30th of July this year we knocked back a proposal, and that was on the basis that it does not comply with 10.4.2p3 of the planning scheme, as the dwelling would cause unreasonable loss of amenity. Now, when we refer to the documentation on page 108, 10.4.2 is 10.4.2 back on the 30th of July 2018, and it does not comply, as the dwelling would be located 1.5 metres from the western side boundary and extend beyond the building envelope for a distance of 2.5. In addition, the proposed dwelling would be located 1.578 to 12.69 from the eastern side boundary. Now, what's changed? What has changed? Okay, they may have made the building not as is intrusive, but at the same time there is no mention within the performance criteria on page 109 that those matters that were contained within the decision of the 30th of July have been met, because it refers to that standard, and then in the performance criteria in 109 it doesn't address those extent of the amenity or the visual impacts of the building itself. So again, we have this interesting planning scheme which, on the one hand, we knocked something back in July because of the bulk, scale and size, and then on the other hand, it doesn't comply with a number of those factors, and we're giving a tick in the box. So when we're talking about educating the public on the status quo in relation to the planning scheme, what we have at the moment and what may appear to be like for like when it goes into the residential component of the statewide planning scheme, how do we justify this? How do we justify it? Because on the one hand, we're saying it's refused, and on the other hand, we've got the terminology and the documentation to say it doesn't comply, but for some reason or other, the performance criteria on page 109 say it does. So what do you do? And I spend countless hours at night, after sort of sitting down, having a look at it. I've got my hard copies of the planning scheme, and trying to get the balance between what the acceptable solutions say does not comply for bulk scale and bulk scale and amenity. And on the other hand, performance criteria can be massaged, if you want to use that term, to make it fit, and therefore we approve it. I can't support it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Yes, the proposal still has issues as is littered throughout the report. The block of land was bought at a market price, and at that price, presumably the transaction occurred with the owner knowing full well that there is a lot of limitations and scope of what can be actually developed there, and I won't be supporting this proposal before us tonight.
Yeah, other speakers? Alderman Cusick.
Yeah, thank you, Smith. I think we realised at the time we agreed to the subdivision, and as we were told it was complying subdivision, that there would be problems with when it came to applications to build on these blocks. And I support Alderman Walker and Alderman James. I think people bought these blocks and now they're trying to put bigger houses on them, and I understand the concerns of the representative at number 18.
Alderman Cusick. Other speakers? Alderman McFarlane.
I too don't support this application, again in the context that the smaller allotments and the building envelopes that go with them had the justification under the interim planning scheme of being there for infill residential development within urban environments to ameliorate the lack of affordable accommodation for a start, and we haven't seen that happen. Again, with the interim planning scheme and the changes to the planning zone, this area, which was semi-rural beforehand, is now high-density residential. And again, this is a typical outcome of where applicants are trying to make the most of the discretionary ability within the planning scheme. And as I've commented before about being able to build large houses on small lots, that was not the intent of those changes, and I don't support them.
Other speakers? Right reply, Alderman. Oh, sorry.
Mayor, I'd just like to query when Alderman James, and he's reading correctly, actually says that the two-storey dwelling was refused by council at its meeting on the 30th of July 2018. I've looked back to the July agenda. It's not on the July agenda, so for 2018. My recollection is that it was quite a lot longer ago than that, so I'm just a little bit confused. The July agenda for 2018 only had 3 planning items, so I guess that's only a technical point, but I'm just a little bit confused as to when we actually made that decision.
Other speakers? Right reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, for those who are going to vote against the approval of this application, I do ask the question, what are the planning reasons? What are the reasons specifically in relation to the applicable standards under the scheme? And if you do believe that it doesn't comply with an applicable standard under the scheme, then where is your motion for refusal? I think it behoves us, if we're going to make a decision other than that the planners have recommended, that we move an alternate motion, that we put an alternate motion forward, we have it prepared, and we have the reasons in terms of the planning scheme stated. Now, Alderman James said, looking at page 109, that there was no reference to visual impact. That's because the report on the performance criteria P3 clause 10.4.3 continues over the page to 110, where in terms of visual impact, they refer to the fact that it was revised according to the previous design. It is considered that the revised design involving a reduction in height, greater setback from the western side property boundary and a shortening of the overall wall length will offer sufficient visual relief when viewed from the adjoining vacant property. So they have addressed the visual impact performance criterion. Also wanted to make a bit of a pedantic point, but a slight correction to Alderman Thurley. It wasn't the performance criteria in relation to privacy. They weren't actually considered because it met the acceptable solution. So, you know, as far as I can see, the development complies with the relevant standards. I still haven't heard from those who are opposing it where it is that they disagree with the officer's report and the officer's recommendation, because I think we need to make sure we put forward a reason based on planning reasons on the planning scheme if we are going to make a recommendation other than that put by the officers. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 11.3.6 is a development application at 430 Clifton Beach Road, Clifton Beach, for a dwelling. Thanks, Alderman Chong. Seconder. Alderman Hume, thank you. Would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you.
Alderman Hume. Other speakers? In that case, the recommendation is for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Alderman Chong, did you wish to leave? Item 11.3.7 is a development application for tenancies 2A and 3, 7 Bligh Street, Rosny Park, for food services, sports and recreation, community and entertainment. Thank you. Seconded, Alderman Cusick. Would you like to speak to it?
Mr Mayor, the discretion that comes into play with this application is in relation to provision of car parking, and sufficient parking spaces have been, if I'm looking at the correct development, sufficient parking spaces have actually already been allocated to a previous development, therefore it complies.
Motion, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. Could we recall Alderman Chong, please? (11.3.8) is a development application at 10, 11 and 12 Garrett Court, Oakdowns. Alderman Walker.
Moved as per the officer's recommendations.
Will that be a seconder, Alderman?
I'll second it with an additional change to General Act 3 to amend the plan, which states that the garbage bin enclosure, which is being relocated to the west side of the driveway with sufficient extra space for 2 additional green waste bins and 2 car parking spaces relocated onto the other side of the site.
You happy with that?
No, we do it.
I need a seconder for the proposer. Thanks, Alderman Campbell. Sorry, Alderman McFarlane, it wasn't accepted. So you are, of course, at liberty to move it as amendment during a debate.
Okay.
Alderman Walker, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, for generally standard infill style developments. They've gone through the process and I think we should be approving it without making last minute unforeseen changes upon them.
Thank you. Alderman Campbell? No. Alderman McFarlane, did you wish to speak to the motion or against it?
I would like to make an amendment, to seek an amendment to the motion.
I think we copied what you wanted to amend the motion with. Is there a seconder to the amendment?
No?
Alderman Thurley has seconded the amendment, so we're now debating the amendment. Thank you. Alderman McFarlane?
Within the proposal in the third condition, which was to relocate the garbage bin enclosure to the west side of the driveway for the benefit of the garbage truck to be able to use their lifting facilities, and then relocate the 2 car parking spaces over to the other side or somewhere else on site, whichever. I did ask if we could include room for 2 green waste bins because they were not included in the dimensions for the bins that were there. So this is purely to, in moving those bin enclosure over to the left-hand side, to just make room for 2 green waste bins as well.
Alderman Thurley?
I was quite pleased that Alderman McFarlane added this addition because I know of situations, say in South Street, Belrive, where a number of units there don't have green waste bins or provision for a green waste bin, and any trimmings that are done can be flushed down into the stormwater system, which is not good. So this is actually preempting a need, and it's creating a space so it doesn't have to be a burden going into the future where someone really wants to dispose of green waste from the property. So it's something that should be included going forward into the future all of the time because it's something that we need to promote.
Other speakers in regard to the amendment. Alderman Hume?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to speak for the motion and against the amendment.
At this stage, we're only debating the amendment.
Then I will just speak against the amendment.
Thank you.
And the reason I'm doing so will be of no surprise to you that it's a planning reason. I think that green waste bins are a wonderful thing. I think it's something that residents should have. I think it's great to recycle green waste. And I certainly think it should be encouraged. However, when we look at the planning scheme and the relevant planning provision, clause 10.4.4, performance criteria P1A, it says capable of storing the number of bins required for the site. The number of bins required is those that every residence is required to have, which is they must have at least 1 recycle bin and 1 general waste bin. And so I don't see that we have a planning reason to increase that requirement to accommodate bins that they aren't required to have. The development as it stands is compliant with the planning scheme.
Speakers on the amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I will speak against, I will not support the amendment. And the reason, as Alderman Hume has stated, it complies. But I would think if we're relocating a car park, I mean, it's a development with 5 multiple dwellings. If we're relocating a car park and additional space for green waste bins, which isn't required under the plan scheme, it's going to require significant redesign, I would think, and significant extra cost.
Alderman Pearce?
Same comments as Alderman Cusick. I just think it's going to change the things dramatically, and I think, as you say, if I had a diagram what they're doing, but they're proposing something which is totally different to what the scheme's allowing. So I just think I couldn't support it.
Alderman Chong?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor. I'm actually not going to support the amendment for 2 reasons. Firstly, because the proposed storage actually includes enough space anyway, so we don't need a particular amendment to enforce that we can put the extra 2 bins in. But also, on a basis of consistency, we, as a normal rule, do not insist on units having space for green waste minutes. And we've done that on a number of occasions in this chamber, and I think it's appropriate to be consistent with these things.
No right of reply on the amendment, so I'll put the motion that the amendment as proposed by Alderman McFarlane. All those in favour? Against? The amendment is lost. Alderman Walker, I think you've already, and Alderman Campbell, spoken to the motion. Are there any other speakers to the motion, please? And that includes anyone who's spoken on the amendment who's entitled to speak again. In the absence of any, Alderman Walker, right of reply?
Yes, we've come to the conclusion. It was a debate, it had a sideline around green waste wheelie bins. I'm not antagonistic towards them. I floated them first in 2011 on my campaign. And those that are still that excited about them when they buy this development, Council will provide them an opportunity should they wish to follow it up. But let's be consistent and let's just vote for this as it was tabled.
The recommendation is approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. 11.3.9 is a development application for 6 Anchorage Court, Tranmere, for a dwelling. Alderman Campbell moved. Second, Alderman Chong. Speakers? Any other speakers? I'll put the motion approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously, and that concludes our business as a planning authority. Moving on to asset management. We have 11.5.1, Norma Street traffic issues. We'll just wait for Mr Graham to take his chair. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Thurley. Seconder, Alderman Chong. Thank you. Alderman Thurley, would you like to speak to it?
As the motion reads and the recommendation reads, there shouldn't be a problem with this at all, because it's purely asking that residents that are affected by this, by any proposed change in Norma Street, be contacted to seek feedback. So there's nothing actually happening at this stage. What I did note in the report was that the 4 residents which are most directly close to a recommendation of traffic restriction, parking restriction, didn't lodge any representation or didn't lodge any complaint. So it's obviously come from somewhere else. I like the fact that Metro have supported a possible recommendation for the future. So it will be interesting once the residents are contacted to see where discontent comes from and whether the residents that do have parking issues do submit a submission as well.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As is noted in the report, the petition didn't come from these particular residences, and I think it's important that they get the chance to answer directly whether they approve any changes.
Other speakers. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. I did have one representation for a person that lives on a corner of the street where they look like they may put no standing signs, and she obviously is a bit concerned because she has a frail elderly mother who she picks up from out right outside the home. And I tell her now she wanted to lodge an application, but she was that stressed that she may not be able to park outside with her elderly mother, but she just said she couldn't do it. So I'm raising these issues. Hopefully the consultation will be able to work something out, but I can tell you she's very worried that, with an elderly mother, and she parks right outside the house, gets the mother straight in the car. I can tell you she's extremely nervous.
Speakers? Alderman Thurley, right of reply?
Alderman Pearce has reiterated what I've said, and it'll be interesting to see the results.
Thank you. So the recommendation is that we authorise the GM to consult on parking restrictions. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.5.2 is the City of Hobart Draft Transport Strategy. Thanks, Alderman Hume. Second, Alderman Chong, I think.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, in moving the officer's recommendation, which is just to endorse the response that was workshopped and already provided on council's behalf by the general manager, and had to be done in a hurry because the period for comment had already closed a while ago. But I also put in my own personal submission on the draft Hobart Transport Strategy, and a couple of things that I noted in that submission were, first of all, we need to recognise that across Greater Hobart, the transport system is one whole system. What happens in Clarence can affect what happens in Hobart. What happens in Hobart can affect what happens in the Northie. And it really needs to be looked at on a system-wide basis. And while I commend Hobart for coming up with their own strategy, I think that what they need to do now, while there are some actions in that strategy that they could implement locally, as has been identified in the General Manager's response and in the report, a number of those strategies need to be looked at on a broader regional area. And that's what I encourage the City of Hobart to do. And I think the best forum for that to be done is the working group that's looking at transport through the discussions on the Hobart City deal. Certainly support the use of smart city solutions, and particularly things like sensors and open data. And I think a lot can be done with open data. One of the great advantages of open data is the development of third-party applications. I think that data could be collected and made available on not just a long-term basis, but also some real-time data. Could be quite useful. And I think the other thing that needs to be understood about the City of Hobart and their transport system is that Macquarie and Davey Streets are really a big bottleneck, and they are actually a key sort of transit for they are central to the whole system. And while the City of Hobart may wish to manage those streets in relation to their own interests, when I think those streets actually belong to all of Greater Hobart because they affect how all of us commute. Another thing that I think was really good identified in the report is the development of integrated transport hubs, and that's the way a lot of cities are going now in terms of managing their transport. And this would be particularly useful if we end up developing other modes of public transport, having integrated timetables and ticketing systems, and hubs where those modes of transport come together. This is all stuff that I think really needs to be explored through that Hobart City deal process with the appropriate, expert input. And we also have another document that feeds into that, which is the state government's Greater Hobart Transport Vision. So, a lot of work going on in this space. It's a great report from Hobart City Council, but they do need to feed some of it into these broader discussions.
Thank you. One of the things that frustrated me when I first looked at the work that Hobart City Council was doing was they seemed to think that the traffic suddenly miraculously appeared at the outside of Hobart City Council and didn't actually come from anywhere, and therefore it was inappropriate to talk to everybody else. I'm still a little bit that way, but I have to say I think the recommendation here that we note the work and do in our submission make some additional comments on regional cooperation and how we can work in partnership, because the reality is that most of the people who work in the City of Hobart don't live there. They live in Clarence, they live in Glenorchy, they live in Kingborough, and we need to deal with this issue as a collective whole, not individually. I think the recommendations in the report are sensible and we should support.
I support the recommendation, but I must admit when I read the report I was disappointed. It had no effect on us as such, and the first 3 years of the plan is going to deal with key walking, cycling and parking plans along with a smart roads plan. That's the first 3 years. there's crying out for traffic congestion and ways of meeting it on that scale. There's no mention of public transport in that at all. And developing these plans concurrently with a local area approach. And I think this indicates that a Greater Hobart Act and a strategic alliance between Hobart, Clarence, Kingborough and Glenorchy is extremely necessary, because transport, as Alderman Chong has alluded to, we all have to travel through Hobart. We're all affected. This isn't just a Hobart issue, but this doesn't really include anybody else. So yes, the implementation plan and all the money can be spent on local area issues, but it is a bigger concern, and I look forward to Clarence putting its submission forward and highlighting that fact.
Okay. This report's for noting. I note it.
Alderman Pearce, are you noting it too?
Look, I read this report. One thing that we noticed with traffic and other things, it has a time variation. We know sometimes in the morning everything's packed with cars, in the afternoon different scenario. And that's one of the things I noticed in this report. It doesn't say anything about time. It doesn't say, the peak hour is this, the peak hour is that here, peak hour is 8 to 9 in Clarence and whatever. It's from 6 to 8 in Sorrel. And as I think Alderman Chong said, it's very much Hobart orientated. Why don't they come and talk to us and the surrounding areas? Because drive around with me for a day and I can show them, and I'm sure people from other councils could show them things. So again, like I said, it's going to take a long, long time.
Thank you. I'll reply, Alderman here.
Sorry, I'm not quick enough. I'd like to note it as well, really. I mean, they haven't taken into regard any of the traffic data that we have already done about major hotspots in the early morning. We've not had any regional discussions on park and ride. And I just feel that, unless we hurry up and do those connected discussions, this document doesn't really hold up, in the sense of, if I want to get from here to Kingston, peak hour traffic, not going to happen. And the trucks. Again, where we've had, in the last 50 years, huge research into getting trucks out of Hobart, because for me that's a major concern for me when I go over there, and there's no mention of it.
Anybody else? I'll reply, Alderman here.
I thank all the aldermen for their contributions. I think the message from all of us is loud and clear, that traffic is in Hobart is a Greater Hobart issue. The system is connected, and to the City of Hobart, you need to talk to us.
The motion is that we note the report and endorse the GM's response. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. And moving on to governance. 11.7.1 is the quarterly report to be received. Sorry.
Slide 3.
Did I miss one?
I think they do.
Oh, I apologise. 11.5.3, yeah, Bayview College Memorandum of Understanding to lease and manage school sports facilities. Thank you, Alderman Fairley. Alderman Chong, I think, was on her feet first.
I guess.
Alderman Fairley, would you like to speak to it?
In my time here in the chamber for 4 years, I have been supporting sporting infrastructure and hoping that as a whole council we would do that. And I've been saying that we need more interaction with the state government in relation to the facilities that we have on the Eastern Shore. And this is an initiative that's come from a very progressive school environment, which virtually encompasses all of the things that make communities special. And if the school can be supported to produce its agenda, which is to create a sporting environment for its students and is promoting sports excellence as such. And the magnificent fact is that the facilities will become available after school hours to the community. And this is just an efficient use of infrastructure. It's about making sure that the facilities that we have, and it's a particularly relevant area that this should occur in, because it is a very popular school, it has a great culture, and the fact that we have open space there is absolutely fabulous. And we have a neighbouring oval which we have known has been underutilised. We hope that by doing this it will change the whole feeling in the area to make sure that the whole of our community in Rugby is actually changed for the better. And this is an excellent example, and I commend the school. I love that there's pressure put on. I'm saying this with tongue in cheek because there's always pressure put on the state government to council. I'm a little tired of seeing that. It's a little handballing. Let's put the pressure on council, because it will be pressure on council to bring the facilities up to standard, because that's what we have to do, because if we're hiring facilities out under our name, they have to be at a certain standard. So that's fantastic for the community. I just hope the state government assists us as much as it can.
Thank you. Council, as we know, is in the middle of a recreational needs analysis, which is turning into a bit of a magnum opus, I think, but you know, at some point it will appear. But one of the things that we know anyway, looking at requirements for grounds, is the fact that we have a lot of competition for the grounds that we have at the moment. Everybody wants the grounds all the time, and with the cricket and the AFL seasons overlapping more, that competition is getting much harder. This is the first step in a process to potentially adding this particular ground into the mix, if you like. It's worked well at Clarence High. Obviously, the Department of Education has facilities which are used extensively during the school days and then not at the rest of the time. And it's potentially something that will work well in with the rest of our facilities. I think we should engage with the school to sign a memorandum of understanding and move on from there.
Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We will be discussing in the next item, the Cambridge Primary School Master Plan, and
about 3 items on.
3 items on. Thanks for that correction. I appreciate that, Mr Mayor. 3 items on, and I think we have to have that debate. But when we do, you can appreciate the involvement that the state government, through the Department of Education, paying their fair share of the costs to develop this ground at Cambridge. Having said that, can we come back to this issue?
Please do.
And I'm trying to draw a parallel between that next item and this one, because in this particular recommendation, it is great to know that we are doing a program in conjunction with the Bayview School, but at the same time, the costs in relation to this, and the prior speakers were quite right in sort of tapping into the market and saying we need to work together with them. But this particular matter will have a cost. It will have a cost, and on page 275, they have spelled out a number of indicative costs that it would appear from the documentation and the reading of the documentation that perhaps Clarence Council is having to find the money for 1.390 million over the future years. Now, in the recommendation that's before us, it does spell out, amongst other things, that in the last part B, that it will be subject to a standard budget approval processes of future council annual plans. Now, given that, are we sort of, by signing off on the memorandum of understanding here with the school that council will have to, depending upon the budget allocations at the time and what determination we may give to it. But there's nothing in here, Mr Mayor, to say that the education is going to cop up, as they have alluded to and have actually stated in writing with respect to the Cambridge Primary School. I think we have to be careful. It's great to be in participation with the Education Department, and we've done a great deal with the Clarence High School, but that has already been noted in here. That's a different issue to what we are discussing now. And it's quite clear in the verbiage within this officer's report that there is no similarity between what we've done with the Clarence High School in its development phase and what may occur in relation to the Bayview School. I'm just drawing a council's attention to it. We've already stated that the 7 Mile Beach proposal, well, it's still on the cards as far as page 277 is concerned, but I don't think that may come to light because of the costs, etc., etc. But having said that, I would like to pose a question through you to Mr Gray, and that is that has the Education Department or the school in concert, have they indicated any amount other than the 60,000 that we have actually put into to proceed with some consultation and discussion? Have either those agencies or the Department of Education or the school indicated of any funds that may be either in forward planning to meet some of the costs in relation to 1.3 million? If the engineer could answer my question.
Mr Mayor, our discussions with the Department of Education School have not indicated having any funds available, but they certainly have expressed interest in being keen to work with council to source funding, not just from council, but potential other state government funding for the development at Bayview in the future.
Other speakers? Alderman Pearce.
I totally agree with the recommendation. I think it's great to have a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Education. I hope this continues in many other areas, not just this one. I think it's a great thing, and yes, it will cost council some money, but I'm one, and I know a lot of people around here know that I've always tried to get our sporting ovals the best we possibly can for many, many years. And to see this develop will be tremendous, I think. Because look, the way women's sport especially is progressing, we already know we're probably 3 ovals short as is. Yes, it's going to cost us some money, we know that. But the fact is, I always say, a kid playing sport is somebody that's not doing graffiti and doing mischief, because when a person plays sport and they become involved in a club, they take that area, that ground, and that club as they own part of it. So I think this is certainly a win-win situation. And look, I'll tell you, the way women's sport is growing, we've got to do something, we've got to do it very quickly, because a lot of our facilities are really not up to standard for female sport.
Thank
you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, I support this motion. This whole precinct is changing. There's much more private residential now in this area. There'll be significant growth in population and in youth. And I'll take Alderman Jones' point. We do need to ensure that there's adequate financial contribution from state government and others, but I support the motion.
Yes, I support the motion. I find that within my area I have seen a big interest in sport that goes from junior to senior. And for me, the senior abilities for the local youth or younger people have proven to be very beneficial to the national AFL agenda. A number of Clarence players and Lauderdale players have been taken up by the mainland, and I don't think that we promote that fact enough, and that within the school environment, that's where that continuation from primary school to secondary school becomes really important, because they tend to fall off a little bit as they get into their teenage years. These costings that are in the report are pretty standard. They're not unlike the costs that we have looked at in the refurbishment of Clarence High School. And it could be a long time coming to get the 7 Mile Beach up. So the necessity to have more grounds available pretty much within the next 2 years is something we should consider, and I support the documentation.
I think it's really important to note that this is a memorandum of understanding, and therefore it actually makes it very clear that this is a non-binding agreement. So it is the starting point, and so some of the aspects that Alderman James is talking about, my understanding is that with the memorandum of understanding, those aspects can be discussed and negotiated. We might not get as far as personally something that will take place. The other aspect that I would like to actually ask through you, Mr Mayor, to the officers, is that there was a letter of support from an organisation called Grassroots Community Development. And at the bottom of that letter, Scott Wade, the Director of Grassroots Community Development, notes, Andrew and Jill, post sending this letter, I will make contact with each of you individually. I'd like to know whether or not contact has been made by this organisation with Andrew, I imagine, is Andrew Paul. I'll just have a look at the top of the letter. Yes, it's to Andrew Paul. So has this organisation actually met with our General Manager? And if so, could we actually be briefed on what came out of that meeting? Because what is being discussed here in terms of a program actually looks as though it would link into, one, our recreation needs analysis, and two, our health and wellbeing framework. So I would actually like to know quite a bit more about this organisation and what has been discussed with the organisation.
For you, Mayor. Alderman Von Berto, I can confirm that discussions have been held. I met with Scott Wade during the course of last week, and Mr Wade was able to take me through the proposal and the work that organisation is currently undertaking. And we spoke about that in the context of the recreation needs analysis and how those two initiatives might dovetail. Thank you. I certainly can give you some more information in due course.
Other speakers? In that case, right reply, Alderman Thurley.
I wanted to emphasise also that a memorandum of understanding will put between Council and Bayview Secondary College will actually put Council in a better position to engage with the state government in relation to the costs going forward in relation to bringing the grounds up to standard. But I note that Council's current sport and recreation strategy is to maximise the utilisation of existing assets before building new ones. So this actually supports that strategy. It's great to see that there have been letters of support, and it's actually a very unifying occurrence that's happening through Bay Beach Cottage. You've got Lauderdale Football Club, Netball Tasmania, Clarence United Football Club, Cricket Tasmania, Clarence District Cricket Club, Eastern Suburbs Rugby Union, and Grassroots Community Development. So isn't it wonderful to see that we may have a facility for once where nobody's in competition, or the different areas of sport are not in competition, and all in unison to actually get the community progress. And I think it's summed up, and I'll just sum it up by reiterating point 2.7, sports grounds and facilities at Bayview Secondary College.
That doesn't
I
apply.
don't think that relates. I've been talking that
I
long.
think Mr.
No,
Nelson
no.
is timing himself.
Not
Sorry,
only
apologies.
provides an opportunity to use valuable flatland, but also as a catalyst for broader community change by efficiently and effectively using government assets to deliver improved community outcomes in terms of the physical, mental and social health of the local community.
So the motion is that we authorise the signing of the MOU and its implementation subject to normal budgetary processes. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Now, move on to governance. 11.7.1 is the quarterly report to the 30th of June be received. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Second, Alderman McFarlane. Do you wish to speak to it, Alderman Chong?
Just to note perhaps how well the council is performing due to strong growth in that area. It's interesting to see how much we are growing as a city.
Just to comment that it is an excellent opportunity to have in writing the day-to-day activities that happen around the council. We can't always be everywhere, but this document fills us in from quarter to quarter. And I often read certain sections in depth and call various managers with regard to certain points. So it's a great way of keeping up with where we're going.
Yes. Alderman James.
I have two questions, and the first one is to Mr. Toohey. In his capacity as overseeing the Department of Community Development, on page number 12, Mr. Toohey, Alma's Activities Centre, Clarence, it says in the opening sentence, Council has endorsed the full redevelopment of the site. Does that mean that all stages that we have discussed, which is quite a lengthy process and quite costly, by using the word full, does that mean that Council has in fact endorsed stages 1 to 5 and the full cost associated with that?
Mayor, what it means is the council has fully endorsed the overall plan. It will be done in stages. The funding hasn't been fully allocated to do all of that work. There's only been partial funding made available in this financial year, so it will have to be done in future years as well.
Second question?
Yeah, the second question, and thank you for that word concept. I think it really explains it. My next question is in relation to asset management, and that's to Mr. Graham. On page 15, Mr. Graham, it refers to the Roaches Beach access and also to the designing the access point to Roaches Beach. Can you give me or inform Council of the time frame that was identified as commencement date that we wrote to Crown Land Services seeking advice for those works, and the date that we did get or did receive approval for the work obviously to go to the development application stage? Can you provide Council with the time frame of the initial request to Crown Land Services and the date of receipt of advice for us to proceed?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have the exact dates, but the sort of indicative time frame
Just a supplementary on that. Given that short time frame, would it be possible for us to be able to write to Crown Land Services and get a response of any sandbagging which may be utilised in Bamborough Street, and get a response back as quickly as we have in relation to Rachel's Beach.
I wonder, Alderman James, that is a third question that you snuck in there. Would you mind putting it in writing? And I'm sure we'd all be interested in seeing the response in the weekly report. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Any other discussion there on the... the mover? So the motion is that the quarterly report for the 30th of June be received. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.2, the Local Government Act reviewed draft terms of reference. Thank you, Alderman McFarlane. Seconded, Alderman Thurley. Speakers?
I do vaguely remember this coming out quite some time ago, and I think in some of our workshop discussions it seemed I was the only one that read it all the way through, which was quite an effort in the context that my cynical nature was looking for how they make changes that they don't actually inform you about. So the main thing that came out of this document for me was the fact that it was difficult to read, repetitive, and it is in the recommendation in C.2, looking at the review and consideration of areas within the current Local Government Act which are unclear, ambiguous, or that would benefit from redrafting, particularly with requirements to petitions, although I thought myself at the time that the redrafting needed to be made more community friendly because it becomes too repetitious in some areas. So I support this motion because I didn't have a difficulty understanding it, but I did get very bored with the repetitive nature of the way it was written, and there's no need for that in this day and age. We have people with the capacity to make documents a lot more easier to understand and easier to legislatively implement as well. It's purely a review for me on a lot of grammar and jargon.
2018 marks the 25th anniversary of the Local Government Act 1993. So in that quarter of a century there's been a lot of changes. And this review is very pertinent, it's very relevant, and I think we'll all embrace it as people that need to abide by the Local Government Act. We will love to see the review is to consider 7 different items. I won't read them to you because you've all got these in front of you, and all of it makes sense. All of it will make life hopefully a little easier for elected representatives for a start. Thank you.
I think, and I alluded to it before, that we are in this motion asking the government to widen the terms of reference a bit to improve the community consultation function, interaction between the Local Government Act and LUPA. And I think if we can pick up on that and get some, it might address some of the issues that have been raised around the table tonight in earlier motions. So I really commend that part of it too. Any other speakers? Right reply.
I would like to see this come back to Council for a really in-depth conversation, because when we are sitting at home reading things on our own, it's very difficult to feel what other aldermen might support or not support without that discussion. And I'd like to see the discussions at the workshop become a lot more interactive, because once we start talking about changing something into a contemporary best practice framework, I myself would have difficulty comprehending what that meant at times if I don't know what the outcomes are going to be. So I think the staff could give us some professional advice on the future changes and how they relate to our role.
That will happen. So the motion is we support the recommendation from the staff. All those in favour? favour? Pardon me. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to 11.7.3, Cambridge Primary School Master Plan. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm aware that there is...
I'll second.
You don't know what you're seconding yet.
Well, are you aware what you're seconding yet?
Look, I'm aware that there has been some alternates that have been circulated and even discussed. I've given it some thought, and I am moving as written in the agenda 11.7.3. I'll note a couple of the following points. That it is indeed a great school, indeed a popular school, and a popular school with a population growing around it. That's in part due to all the land developments that we've approved in the area. Why am I approving the officer's recommendation as opposed to an alternate that's done the rounds? Well, I believe that the Education Department's been fairly reasonable. I believe the school's been reasonable. I believe it took council a little while to get its head around it, but as per the report, it was on the path to reasonability. My concern is around certainty, and I believe that what is written in the agenda is providing the school community with a degree of comfort and certainty that change will occur, rather than us taking a side path that might lead down a different area. So after reflecting on things, I believe that the best thing we can do for the Cambridge Primary School community, part of the Clarence community, is to move the officer's recommendations as tabled in the report.
Alderman James.
Yes, I support the officer's recommendation, and can I say that the timing on this has been what I regard as quite inappropriate, because we had meetings. I had a meeting at the school about 2 years ago. We discussed it, and I thought what was being proposed at the time by the principal and also the president of the Parents and Friends School Association was that it was a great step forward. There was a contribution being made in the Cambridge Primary School Master Plan, as distinct from the Cambridge Master Plan that did have a number of concerns in relation to where the school could go in the longer term. The question of having to provide public notice of intention and notifies the public in relation to consultation. Again, I can only say what I said earlier. It's too late. We should have had it back then, and then the community would have been involved, and we could have done that because we had ownership. We have ownership of the Oval, and we could have had a meeting, as we did with the Football Federation some years ago, Mr Mayor, and there was an uproar over that particular matter because of the nature of what they wanted and how much of the ground they wanted to use, etc., etc. That didn't happen, thank heavens, because I was very concerned about it because of the nature of concerns from the residents at that public meeting at least 5 years ago or thereabouts. In this case, we should have, in my view, had consultation prior to it coming to this time frame, because we would have had the community involved. We would have had a more robust debate, because people at the time would have liked to have known what the school's intentions were and how they were going to, and the Department of Education, how the department was going to fund the proposal. So look, we've lost that opportunity. It's a shame, and it goes back to the point that I've been making time and time again, and I'll put on my brochure. That community consultation should start before we actually make a decision subject to community consultation. I know it's spelled out where we're doing, where we have to deal with a lease of public land, and that is a process that needs to be followed. But there's nothing stopping that, Mr Mayor, to be done prior to and not long after when we had the discussion with the school council and also the principal of the education, the principal of Cambridge Primary School at the time. I will support this because I think we've got to tick it off, give and provide the necessary support And let's face it, where are the funds coming from? What are they going to provide? It's a great result. And I think this motion should be carried unanimously, because I believe the school and the public are totally behind this project. And as a conclusion, I spent some hours on Sunday with some residents, and they're well aware of this. And Christine made the comment that we were totally opposed to the Football Federation's proposal, but we are in fact so much behind the school and the Education Department in making this facility for the whole of the community.
Yeah. Alderman McCallum.
I wish to move the amended motion, which includes community consultation. Right. The only difference between this...
just to be clear now, we are speaking about an amendment,
yes,
which includes community consultation.
Yes.
Okay.
And the only difference between this recommendation and the amended recommendation is in section C, that council conduct community consultation in respect to recommendations A and B, providing notice of a public meeting to be held at a time and location to be determined by the General Manager. That is the addition. Now, the basis of this kind of amendment is based on the fact that council owns this land for the community benefit. Within the context of looking at changes within an area on publicly owned land, there is a need for some kind of memorandum of understanding or master plan or concept plan to be available to take to the community for consultation to occur. Now, for me, that's what some of us around this table have been waiting for to happen. We do support Cambridge School. We do look at the needs of the school needs across the whole of the district, but at the same time, this land has in the past had deep and meaningful responses from the local community who care very much about the area in which they live, and they need to be a part of the outcome. Whether that makes any changes or not, I'm not aware. I don't think so myself. I don't think there is anything in here that they will object to, but we do need to take it to them first.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. And I support Alderman McFarlane's words there in Part C, where we do have community consultation. Now, why I will support the motion, because the Department of Education in this motion agree that no further encroachments onto the reserve be sought for further expansion of the school. Now, I think that...
Yes. We will have another opportunity to debate the full motion. Yes. At this stage, we're just addressing the amendment of community consultation.
Well, I agree with the amendment because it's got Part C in it, which I want to see. I want to have it out to the community. I mean, some of these aldermen, I'm a bit surprised that they say community consultation. We've got a chance to do it. They shy away and say no. This Part C, which I congratulate Alderman McFarlane moving, does give that opportunity.
And I'll speak on the amendment. Yes. Alderman Cusick, then Alderman Thurley.
Yeah, I also support the amended motion. Alderman James stated that he spoke with communities and the community support this. Well, let's have a public meeting and get public community endorsement. I'm sure the school would want full community support, and this can only be positive. I support the school, but I believe that we need to have the community support indicated at a public meeting.
Alderman Thurley.
I have to say that I'm quite amazed at Alderman James's comments, because I think he must have been missing in action somewhere when we've been talking and having to debate this, because there were 4 options that we were looking at. It's only now that we're actually looking at one of those. What did you want to go to the public with beforehand?
Through the chair, please.
You just said you did. You said
look,
too late.
Alderman Thurley, please keep the personality out of it.
I get frustrated. I can't understand why someone would suggest that this public consultation should have been done before. Why do you want to confuse the public over this might happen, this might happen, this might happen, until you've got something actually concrete to go to with the public? This is the perfect time for a public consultation, and I think you just pick and choose when public consultation is supposed to take place, and this is no more obvious time than now. And the reason it has to happen now is because the decision actually affects public land. It's the council land, it's public land. It was gifted to the council, and we have to go back to the community because our conscience would say that we need permission from everybody. We support the school, we love the school. We're disappointed that it's compacted by its surrounds, it's on a busy corner. We would have loved to perhaps be debating a new greenfield site, but we're trying to deal with a situation, a very popular school with a fantastic reputation that's becoming more popular by the minute. I know I argued here that I wanted the school to go up and increase its density on its footprint now. This happens in Melbourne, in bigger cities all the time, because the reason given was that it would impact on the school's ability to keep functioning. But this could have happened. They go up in a week, they go up in a few days in Melbourne when you're having prefabricated additions put on buildings. So it could have happened. It's not an impossibility. But as it is, we want to progress this because it seems to be at a bit of a stalemate. So we really want to progress it. But won't it be great when it's the whole community behind it?
Yeah, other speakers? Alderman James, on the amendment?
On the amendment, yes, yeah. Thank you. On the amendment, yes. I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same wavelength here. Look, I'm trying to not debate the original motion because Part C allows the public to have their say. So by having another consultation process as being proposed here, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to achieve? The fact of the matter is, it's going to delay the process. It's going to delay the process when the school and the education department have been so consistent over the years, and by the very nature of having another consultation process when it's embedded within the original motion, because we're dealing with the lease of public land, you're going to achieve it anyway, because people have the opportunity to put in their objections, because we're dealing with council land. So why do we have a double whammy here? Why do we have to go again? And as it's been said, I'm supportive of consultation, but I know that if there are concerns, then it will come out in the original motion, rather than just having another meeting when I believe that 90% of the community are on side in relation to this. And we'll be having a meeting where everybody say, hip hip hooray, it's a wonderful thing, the school's going to be able to utilise a little bit of the ground, that the education department's going to build these new change rooms and facilities, and it's the government that's paying for all this. All we're doing is allowing a little bit of encroachment onto council land. The Yeovil is intact, there's no problems with that. But now we have to go ahead and have another meeting. It's just a waste of time.
I'd like to throw my two bobs in worth as an alderman here, and in regard to the amendment, and find it, we spent a lot of time tonight talking about prior consultation with the community before we actually embark on a statutory process. We were talking about it in the context of planning, but this is equally important. We have a statutory process that we have to go through, and now we're saying, oh, well, we don't have to consult with the community beforehand.
We are consulting.
So I think that this consultation process about this particular one option, which has taken us so long to negotiate and get to, which I think we all agree with, has got to be consulted, and we have to go through the process properly. Alderman Chop.
Thank you. I think we all empathise with the school wanting to move quickly on this. Obviously they have constraints and they need to get on with the business of expanding. But those of us that went to Cambridge some years ago now when we talked with the Football Federation deal and the potential changes that were going to be made to the area then, remember how passionate the people in the local area were about that oval that was bequeathed to the area and how keen they were that nothing would change and that they should be kept informed of what was going on. I think it's fundamental that we do this consultation. As we have said on several occasions tonight, and the Mayor has just mentioned, there is a difference between the statutory process of putting a notice in the paper and people reading that and community consultation. That's been a discussion on a number of occasions and over months between us here on all sorts of matters, in particular with planning. So I think it's really important that we do accept this amendment and actually have a public meeting to let the wider community know what's happening and get their feedback before we start the statutory process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was originally leaning towards supporting the original motion moved by Alderman Walker, but after listening to the debate and considering it carefully, I'm actually going to support the amendment. There are two reasons I'll support the amendment. One of them is I note Alderman James said earlier about concerns about this delaying the process, but I think it's entirely consistent with the motion for the two processes to run side by side, for the community meeting to actually happen during the 21-day objection period. The other point I'll make in relation to the amendment is Section 178 of the Act allows Council to receive not comments, objections. Okay? So in other words, we consider what people submit to us in opposition to the land being sold. That doesn't include a process for us to consider also what people submit to us, or leased I should say, it's not sold, leased. Important distinction. But it doesn't allow us to consider what people submit in support of it, or if they're neither in support or against but want to make other related points. So, you know, the addition of that other aspect of public consultation allows us to have a broader view of the community's consideration of this proposal, rather than just us considering objections. Any other speakers on the amendment?
Yes, I'm disinclined to support the amendment. I would note that there's a time factor associated with it, but also it adds a level of uncertainty to the process for the school community, and I think they've been hanging on for long enough. I think that all parties have moved, and I actually think that the officers that put the report in have done a robust and appropriate job with the original motion that was in the agenda.
I support the amendment, and I feel it's worth noting that the school community is not the whole community. So whilst the school community is very important, it is not the whole community, and I think it's also very important to note that people in the community, and a number of people in the community, live there and are very wedded to the Barilla rivulet. And I am not convinced that the Barilla rivulet is actually going to come out so I want there to be consultation of the sort that is envisaged here, a public meeting, so that we can actually provide detailed information in relation to what will occur beside the rivulet. So in relation to the walking trail and what it's going to actually look like. So I want
be some deliberations in relation to that aspect of the area. Thank you.
Almost run out of speakers on the amendment. There's no right of reply. So the amendment is that we provide notice of a public meeting prior to initiating the statutory process. All those in favour? Against? The amendment is carried and is included in the motion. I think we had the mover and seconder speak to the motion. They had the opportunity to speak to the amendment. So other speakers on the main motion? The speakers so far have been the mover, Alderman Walker, seconder Alderman James, and Alderman McFarlane's also spoken to the main motion. No, she hasn't.
Okay.
She moved. No, you moved the amendment.
But I haven't spoken to the main motion.
No, so feel free.
So feel free. I'd like to follow up on Alderman Bomberto's comments about agreeing to the Department of Education agreeing to work with Council to facilitate the provision of a public walking trail along the Barilla Creek at the rear of the school, because that is an important infrastructure asset for Council with the Cambridge Master Plan. And at this point in time, there have been some discussions of non-support from the school, which I have taken to heart, because this area, again, in that context, was used, its public open space was used mainly for walking dogs, etc. And within our master plan for Cambridge, that is one of our priority assets, is to have tracks and trails that form a hub where people can move around an area and interconnect for health and wellbeing purposes and recreation. So these need to be prioritised within our discussions in the community, and at this point in time, this is not a DA as such. And so this is the time when we can have further discussions about priorities and the fulfilment of those strategies in our planning scheme. The other point is that within the ownership, which is very loud and proud in that area of those grounds, we should be providing interpretive signage, for instance, and asking the community if they want some kind of historical significance placed on that area to fulfil the wishes of the original grant. Because too often we've been placed in situations where it has been very difficult to justify the retention of public open space because we haven't had enough interest in the community to place that significance on it. So I think it's time we followed up with the community and getting those places of cultural significance the weight that they need.
On Piers.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate those words from Alderman McFarlane, but now I'm going to say something which I've said many times in a workshop. Further encroachment onto the reserve will be sought for further expansion of the school footprint. Now this is the second time that this school has asked to lease land, not the first time, the second time. And hopefully in this motion they'll get the message, no further encroachment. Now, 2.5. The Cambridge Memorial Oval is situated on land that was donated to Council in 1949 by the Maxwell family in honour of their two sons who died during World War II. It wasn't given to the school, it was given to Council to manage. The school has had two goes at this, and I think now we've got to tell them that you want the school to advance further. I think they said this will last until 2030. That they look at another site or buy some land nearby, because really this land was given. My father came back from the war and never mentioned it till late in life, and I saw the horrors that he went through. To see this person, the Maxwell family, donate this land in honour of their two sons, I think we've got to keep the rest of it for what it was purposed and what it was given for. So hopefully you know, with the cooperation. I totally support the school and I totally support that they need this land, because what I'm saying is I think enough is enough. And I think this recommendation with the public consultation goes a long way to saying that.
Now, I'm a little bit confused. The amended motion was passed?
Yes.
Just
Amendment.
That was the amendment.
We've got a debate. So the original motion's been amended to include public consultation. Any other speakers to the amended motion? Okay, right to reply, Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's pretty important as we come to this stage of the debate to look just below point D. A decision to lease public land requires an absolute majority of council tonight. So I started the debate out, and as I did so, supported the robust report and the structure of the officer's recommendations. It's now moved from that, and I'm in a situation where I can fight on for perhaps 100% of nothing, or work with 80% of something. And I'm going to be going for the 80% of something. But the 20% that's missing is pretty substantive. It is around time, and it is around increased uncertainty for the school community. So we are where we are. This has to be progressed. There's no point me voting against it and delaying it further.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is the officer's recommendation with the inclusion of that prior consultation. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 11.7.4 is review of the investment strategy and policy. Thank you. Seconded Alderman Cusick. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We have a statutory requirement to fund future infrastructure renewal and capital expenditure as well as general working capital. That means that as a council we have a large amount of cash which is currently sitting on deposits in a whole range of banks. Very safe, very risk averse, doesn't get us a great deal of return either. This proposal looks at how we might get a better return on a portion of that. Obviously we are, as an entity, very risk averse. It's public money, it's not ours. We're not going to be reckless in what we do with it. But it also behooves us to make the best return as we can, because obviously that helps feed into the general income of the council. I think this should be supported by Aldermen as a way to make sure that we get the best returns we can on the money that we have.
Yeah, investment strategy and policy is an area that needs to be reviewed regularly or certainly periodically, but monitored constantly as to performance and security. This is the review and the review of the draft investment policy and strategy. The audit panel has endorsed it, and I seek council support.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Yes, it's a question through you to the new Treasurer, and welcome. The review, and I support those recommendations. So my question through you, Mr Mayor, to the Treasurer, is there any mechanism in the quarterly report to give us a thumbs up in relation to how we're going, so that the council can be informed of, progress into this diversification that we're actually entering into? Or is it more appropriate to have any comment contained within the annual report? I'm just trying to, through you, Mr Mayor, try to ascertain some reporting either on a quarterly basis, which, if it's possible, to be included as an item within the quarterly reports. I'll pose that question throughout, Treasurer, and congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you very much for your question.
Alderman Hugh.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Couple of quick points. We were advised during our workshop briefing that the return we were getting on our current investments with the existing investment strategy was actually less than consumer price index. And consumer price index is probably a fairly generous measure of inflation. When you talk about the cost of council doing business, the council cost index is probably a better measure. In other words, on our current investment strategy, we're losing money. Under this investment strategy, we'll make money. And I do recall when we were debating the fee that was given to the consultants who helped us prepare this report and prepare the investment strategy, there was some comment that you know it was cheap. Whereas on our investment portfolio, we actually only need a 0.03% return for 1 year to recoup that money, and we're actually looking at recouping it many times over. Thank you.
Walker and then Alderman Thurley.
Yes, is this the right strategy? Well, there is no exact right strategy, but is it a prudent way forward? I believe it is. It's still pretty conservative in its process, and probably not a bad time to reflect on how other councils have been going about it. The intellectual colossuses across the river have embarked on their own strategy that has involved decreasing return and increasing risk for added virtue signalling. We haven't taken that path, and I think that's wise.
What we really seeing a change in is the Category 2 situation, because Category 1 relates to the strategy that's been carried out. So it's really only the Category 2 funding that we're talking about where there's a significant going to be a change in the way it's invested. And my only question is, I'm sometimes around this table trying to get council to invest in an asset, for instance, a building purchase or something that comes on the market.
Please don't get distracted.
It comes on the market. I mean, we've had buildings in the vicinity, and we're crying out for extra infrastructure in the form of buildings, and we have some nearby neighbours come on the market. I just don't want to see our funds tied up completely that we cannot make a decision to enter the market as far as being a competitive purchaser at the appropriate time, that's all. So I understand from the Category 2 investments there will be a rolling period, so that there will be funds continually rolling over, and so if that occurs, I'm just looking at the Bunnings building, for example, right across the road.
Look, please don't get distracted.
Thought. You've got to think outside the square. You can't just... You've got to think outside the square. Assets and buildings and property is a significant asset that has magnificent growth. So don't be too conservative in your outlook, Alderman. To my left.
I didn't say a word, Mr Mayor. I just sat here.
Alderman James, please.
Oh, yes.
Any other speakers? Alderman McFarlane.
Not being an accountant and having problems adding up on the odd occasion, I was just thinking that, you know, this gave us an opportunity to look at a very conservative way of making money, but that in the next review, and hopefully we would be looking at this on an annual basis, that there could be some consideration for professional advice on how to take a few more risks. Because I feel that the potential is there for us to be able to support the community with, dare I say, climate change initiatives, or also solar capacity within the area, and also in supporting community solar acquisition. Just my
Alderman Chong. Alderman Kent.
I think that it's still conservative, but that's the space that we're in local government. We can't take risks like Hugh and did and look at the trouble, and a number of other councils with Lehman Brothers. In fact, this council actually had a derivative of Lehman Brothers, and I had a very urgent call from the general manager. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, so, and that was through no fault of the councils either. This is one of these step downs that occur. So you've got to stay on the conservative side, I'm afraid, because it's the public's money, it's not ours, and we're the people that are charged for protecting it.
Thank you. Right reply, Alderman Chong.
Council support.
So the motion is that we adopt the investment strategy and policy and seek expressions of interest for a portfolio manager. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.7.5 is the Memorandum of Understanding concerns that for Taswater. In fact, it's proposing that we support a draft resolutions on a constitution change and change the letter of expectation, shareholders' letter of expectation.
Accept a motion from myself to endorse that.
We have a seconder, please. Thank you, Alderman Hugh. Alderman Jones, would you like to speak to it?
Very briefly, I think it's the way forward and it's the best outcome that I think we could have expected in the circumstances. I seek council support.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wanted to note that there was a briefing by Taswater offered in the 3 regions, and I think I was sitting at the front, so I didn't see everyone who was behind me, but I think I may have been the only one from Clarence who was in that briefing. But it certainly spelt out in great detail what the benefits of this proposal are. The deliverables, if you look at the base case, which is Taswater structure, stays as it is, are not quite as good in some areas, but certainly better than the government takeover scenario. However, I think one of the things affecting those deliverables is also the concession that's been given to the government of putting an effective cap on the increases of water and sewage prices, and I think that's a reasonable concession in return for the $200 million investment they're putting into Taswater's strategy. So it is a good outcome, I think, for our water infrastructure for councils and for
Just a comment on page 3, it says here, 8.2 corporate plan, that the corporate plan shall be for 5-year period changed from 3. I just feel like I don't, in looking at the way we work with our strategic plans on a 5-year basis, but we have an annual budget, I'm wondering whether there could be circumstances where they need to change their corporate plan. So through you to Mr Nelson, if they have occasions when there is a need to change that corporate plan, they can change that under the 5 years?
To actually have a 10-year plan to cover their investment and so on, but the 3 years is actually driven by the regulator, the economic regulator, who reviews the pricing arrangement every 3 years. Yeah.
Doesn't say that. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Alderman Chong.
Look, just very briefly, I think while I will support it, it should be noted the fact that because the dividends to councils are fixed till 26-27, that's an effective reduction for us every year, given CPI increases. That will make a big difference to us.
Any other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Jones. Thank you. So the motion is that we adopt the recommendation. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time. There are no matters on notice. Questions without notice. Alderman von Berto. Alderman Pearce. Alderman Dowse. Alderman Cusick.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you, Graham.
What are we at
with the redevelopment restructure of the roadway outside the Lindisfarne Rowing Club. And that's
the footpath, the multi-user pathway. Yeah. Mr. Graham?
Just briefing one out in terms of work commencing in the next week or so. I'll confirm that.
Two questions, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I was stopped in the street by an elderly resident who was on a walker and started talking to me about the importance to him of curbside ramps for pedestrians.
Your question?
Yep, it is. I would like to know, because I know there are some areas of the city where the ramps are installed and others where they're not. What is the requirement for new curb developments? Is there a requirement for ramps or not?
Graham?
Through I think that's the requirement for new development for our
And second question.
You'll learn.
Mr. Paul didn't brief you on that.
Second question, Mr. Mayor. The last council meeting, I asked a question about an upcoming meeting, which at that time was the next day, where Metro was going to be discussing their ferry proposal. I was just wondering if you could give a brief verbal report on that meeting, please.
Yes, and in fact, since that meeting, there was an announcement, I think, on Friday by the state government that Metro have actually now indeed appointed a consultant to undertake the business case on the ferry service between Sullivan's Cove and Kangaroo Bay. I don't know when that consultancy report's due to be finished. Morning, John.
Two questions, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the Acting General Manager, could we ask where he is in his deliberations on whether or not to give owner's consent on Rosny Hill?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for the question. We've written to the preferred developer, Hunter Developments, and set out a number of considerations we need to take into account in terms of granting or not granting that consent, and have sought a response from them by the 14th of September, after which a decision will be made regarding that consent.
And the second question is, could we please, as a council, place on record, thanks to Jerrick Johnson, who many of you will know, who has a ripe old age of 25, has had to retire from our youth network action group because he's too old.
Well, sir, ask the General Manager to include a acknowledgement in the minutes, please.
Derek's been involved in a number of our strategies over the year. He's been a very active member of a number of groups, and I think it would be good to do that.
Alderman McFarlane.
Two questions. The first one is I've mentioned in the past my concerns about the Rugby sewer plant. So my question is...
Sorry, the Rugby which?
Sewer plant.
Right.
The problems that we have with it. Being on a low cost. The current sewer plant, from my recollection, had X amount of capacity about 5 years ago, and I thought that we had reached that capacity. So my question is, could we have a report on the long-term capacity of the current sewer plant and a possible extension on the block next door of a future extension, because we are now looking at the Dorothy Point, what did we call it, the master area plan?
That's Tas Water. I'm happy to pose the question to Tas Water.
It's not ours anymore, and we're not doing the planning.
Okay,
So
look,
I'd like to...
I'm happy to get an update on what their plans are
Yeah,
for...
so current capacity and a future extension.
Okay, thank you.
And the second question was easy. Have we heard anything back about the South Arm skate park? Short
It was held in relation to the South Arm Skate Park a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks. We're waiting on a decision at the moment.
Two questions, and I'll keep it in the area of Possum Bay, South Arm. There's always talk we hear that Arm End require funds from state government and Clarence Council in order to progress the project, the golf project. Have you been formally approached to provide any funding?
Well, I haven't, as a gentleman.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean look at you.
No, well, neither of us have been, no.
Okay, thank you. And the talk of Kangaroo Bay ferries, is there a site for the terminal, an exact site that the terminal may be located at?
Well, I can say, and I'll ask for further clarification, but my understanding is the state government hope to, or have plans to list it onto the side of the new hotel development, but I've seen no plans to do that at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Walker.
I'll leave it be.
Alderman Jones.
Yes, two questions. Firstly,
President's representative on the BOPT committee has stated that the BOPT used to be run by the Clarence Council. Now the BOPT is moved from the council's sort of jurisdiction to Cricket Tasmania. Question is, how does the council explain and clarify who is responsible for the BOPT and the availability of information about the rules or procedures on event days?
Graham, are you able to help with that, or would you like to take it on notice? It might need a...
I'll take that one on notice to make sure I get the specific details right and inform the Alderman.
Perhaps you could leave the question with...
I have it in writing.
Okay.
But I've got a second question there. Mr Nelson, you can have it in a moment. Very good. My second question is, we have received a response from the Premier endorsing his delegates' previous communication to Council regarding the Rosny Hill development. This is a question to Mr Nelson. Given that the Premier has responded and has endorsed his head of agency with the Department of Primary Industry, Water and Resources, will that decision that's been confirmed by the Premier, will that be one of the key indicators for you not granting managers response in relation to
Question? No, is the short answer. The Premier and Mr Jacoby have essentially said it's not their consent to give because Clarence is the managing authority. We may not agree with that view, but at the end of the day, we also need to give a consent or not, depending on how we assess that. So we've taken advice in terms of how that assessment should be carried out, and that's the assessment that we're working through at the moment.
Well, okay.
I was asked the question, how can council help sporting clubs gain defibrillators? Now, we know there's different grants, but some sporting clubs that are used widely haven't got them. And why I raise this question because it's called...
You only need to ask the question, we can give you the answer to that. Mr Tui, are you able to assist there?
For years now, we've assisted the purchase of several defibrillators for our community.
Supplementary?
And I need to you.
The community support grant applications are advertised twice a year. You're aware of the public that's required that brings us to the closure of the open meeting. I'd like to thank the members of the public that have stayed with us to this point. I do often make the point that unlike the state and federal governments, we don't have a cabinet where we can deal with confidential matters. So we do need to go into camera for those. Thank you.
Yeah, no.
Motion to go into closed session, please. Moved on Pierce, seconded on McFarlane. All those in favour? Carried. Unanimous.